Look at the globe in 1900. Geopolitics is dominated by massive Austro-Hungarian, Russian, German, and Ottoman empires. Arms races and friction over the Balkans led these confident, heavily armed nations to sign rigid defensive pacts, effectively wiring the continent with high-stakes tripwires. In Germany, Kaiser Wilhelm II embodied this era's obsession with martial prestige. He poured massive resources into building the High Seas Fleet, specifically to challenge the dominance of the British Royal Navy. In June 1914, a Bosnian Serb assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, during a state visit to Sarajevo. Imperial leaders across the continent viewed this crisis through the lens of a 19th-century cabinet war. They assumed their industrial might would ensure a decisive, glorious victory long before the winter snows. Germany signaled its commitment to the alliance by issuing the blank check, a promise of unconditional military support for any retaliation Austro-Hungary took against Serbia. When Austro-Hungary declared war on Serbia, the gears of the alliance system began to turn. Russia, acting as the self-appointed protector of the Slavs, immediately began to mobilize its massive military for a full-scale conflict. Germany responded with its own declarations of war against Russia and France, pulling the major powers of Europe into a single, unavoidable collision. This wasn't a series of choices, but a chain reaction. The rigid geopolitical machinery these empires built over decades had finally moved beyond their control, forcing a local assassination into a global disaster. Germany attempted to end the war quickly by swinging through Belgium to seize Paris, but the French and British armies halted the advance at the Battle of the Marne. The war of movement vanished. Both sides dug in, carving out a permanent, stagnant line of trenches that stretched from the Swiss border to the North Sea. To attack, infantry had to climb over the top and walk directly into the path of rapid-fire machine guns and thick belts of barbed wire. High command still ordered men to advance in tight 19th-century formations, only to see them shredded by modern industrial firepower. On the Western Front, the result of this mismatch was a permanent stalemate, where millions died to move the front lines a few hundred yards. To bypass the trenches, the empires turned to the skies. Massive German Zeppelins began long-distance bombing raids over London, while on the ground, both sides introduced poison gas to clear the enemy lines. The British developed the tank, a heavy armored box designed to crush barbed wire and cross the cratered landscape of no man's land. At sea, German U-boats targeted any ship approaching Britain, regardless of its origin, hoping to starve the island into submission. In May 1915, a torpedo struck the Lusitania, a passenger liner carrying over 1,000 civilians and a hidden cargo of munitions, sinking the ship in 18 minutes. The war eventually reached every corner of the globe, from the deserts of the Middle East to the jungles of Africa and the islands of the Pacific. The empires mobilized every resource they possessed to maintain the struggle. By 1917, the logistical strain of supplying millions of soldiers had begun to crack the domestic foundations of the empires themselves. Food shortages and staggering casualties in Russia led to a total collapse of authority. Tsar Nicholas II abdicated his throne, ending 3 centuries of Romanov rule. Within months, communist revolutionaries seized power, signing a harsh peace treaty that surrendered massive territories to Germany and took Russia out of the war. Germany faced its own internal crisis. The British naval blockade was slowly starving the population, leading to mass strikes and a growing demand for an end to the fighting. Germany's decision to resume unrestricted submarine warfare, combined with a secret attempt to bring Mexico into the conflict, finally brought the United States into the war under President Woodrow Wilson. The arrival of fresh American industry and manpower was the breaking point. The rigid political structures of the Central Powers disintegrated as their front lines and economies buckled under the weight of a total industrial war. In November 1918, Germany signed an armistice, and the victors gathered at Versailles to redraw the map of the world and impose heavy reparations on the defeated. While the public celebrated the return of peace, the cost was permanent. 8 million military dead, and millions more civilians lost to hunger and disease. Look at the transformation. The massive, century-old empires were dismantled, replaced by a fractured landscape of new nations like Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, and the Republic of Turkey. The war destroyed the old world order, but failed to build a stable new one. Millions died for the hubris of emperors, leaving behind a map defined by the very grievances and border disputes that would lead directly to the Second World War.